I usually start presentations by saying we're the Rent Network and we're connecting with this agency and we're intersecting together. But this time it's a network intersecting with a network, and I think that's really cool. It's not like agency to agency, it's network to network, it's city to city, and it's like across Canada, which is very exciting. We've never done that before. And I think the whole idea is that we're bringing our story and our adventures that brought us this far to you, and hopefully that will be helpful. But also you have lots to teach us too, because sometimes we just haven't seen a part of the picture that you have. And so we're really excited to learn from you too. We just can't wait. The whole day is going to be really exciting. So basically I'm Janet Fairfield, and I am the rent facilitator. So my responsibilities are to facilitate workshops, to keep the membership going, and we're up to 1,300 members of Rent now, and to monitor the discussion boards, our online discussion boards, and other things which I'll go into as we go along, and then I'll pass it to you to introduce yourself.
Hopefully we can, our role here as far as we see it is to provide you guys with as many resources and information about what's going on and how our sector has developed so that you can do what you do here. Certainly both your network and ours are grassroots, and how things played out in our community may have usefulness to you. So there's going to be a lot of information we're going to be sharing in a very short period of time. But I'm the manager of housing programs. Look at that. This is the biggest screen I've ever seen any of our PowerPoints on. So
yeah, usually a little, no pressure.
So our organization is East York East Toronto Family Resources, which started off as a child and family organization, and in about 2000 it got into the housing business. That's what it is. So as you can see, there are four different program departments, one just on housing, and we have two different sets of programs. One is direct housing, so we have East York Housing Help Center, and we'll get into those services later, and sector support, so that including rent and landlord connect, and that's essentially what our organization looks like on one slide. Thank you. Yeah, and actually there's a bunch of resources from our organization in there that we're going to be referring to throughout the presentation. So if you want to make notes for questions for the Q&A, that would be the document to do it on. So, what are we going to cover today? We're going to start with how our network started was during the build-up to the housing crisis in 2000, what Toronto's response was, why a housing help model, because it sounds as if it's how things developed here are a little different. Janet's going to talk about rent and how that plays out in person and online, as well as Landlord Connect, which is essentially our version of the landlord database that you have here and what that involves, and where the sector goes from here again, because we're entering into yet another housing crisis. And in there, as Gordon mentioned, I'll be talking in as much detail as I can about the rent bank. So that's what Toronto and actually most of Ontario looked like in 95 through 99. There were a number of issues that came into play that created essentially the perfect storm for homelessness. So you can see on the left-hand side, in terms of housing, affordable housing construction stopped. There's a huge devolution of services to municipalities who weren't able to cope. There were mental health institutions being closed and people being deinstitutionalized at a rapid rate. And on the flip side, in terms of poverty law, there were both changes to the tenancy legislation and to rent controls, and there was a 22% cut in social assistance. So all of those factors together created definitely a shortage of income to afford housing and a lack of affordable housing. And I think it's an important point to make that also during that process, there was a lot of amalgamation of municipalities going on. So I'll show you a map of Toronto shortly. But in the amalgamation of municipalities, there was a huge disconnect between the municipalities and the community agencies. And they're having to rethink a lot of things, which in Toronto's kind of worked to our favor in terms of nonprofit organizations. But certainly the devolution of provincial programs and the forced municipal amalgamations in terms of housing policy had a huge impact. So out of the crisis, so this was around the time that the Skippy funding was distributed throughout the country. The city got together under a very proactive thinking mayor with community agencies and came out with the housing help sector. So it was a combination of both federal and provincial funding and some municipal funding at the time to create the housing help sector as opposed to having housing help happening in lots of different service scenarios. So that's kind of the backstory to where we began, and Janet's going to explain then what the sector ended up developing.
Okay. Well, basically, what happened was with this huge explosion, suddenly there's kind of like this, how come so many homeless people all of a sudden? Well, yeah, you take away their money, you raise the rents, you put people out of institutions, what's going to happen, right? So suddenly they hire all these housing workers everywhere, but there's no training. Like there's one worker at every agency and they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what the best practices are to help a person find and keep their housing. So the cities provided funding for these positions, and sometimes being agencies have done it, but there's no coordination. And as well, there are people, housing workers, just meeting together in coffee shops saying, what are we doing? Let's get together and figure out what to do. So I'm going to go a bit more into that when I move on to the next section. Yeah.
So I tried to create something graphically that explained how our sector developed. So essentially, Toronto's response was shelters. Don't have a place to live, you go to a shelter. When the city started working with community agencies on how to utilize funding, and we actually had fairly good housing policy being developed, the housing help model was developed as a strategy. Since then, so we're talking in the last decade, it's gone from very specific roles to functions of housing help in multi-service agencies. So that's what it kind of looks like for us now. So this is a map of Toronto, which is also laid out in the former borough structure pre-amalgamation. And historically, it shows it was easiest for Toronto politically to divide up housing help services by those former boroughs. So I don't know what that is in terms of square footage, but area, but you're looking at 3 million people living there. And we were discussing last night actually that the income demographic in the last decade has totally flipped, where the poorest people live downtown and people with higher income live more outside. Now it's totally flipped, and that people in highest need are essentially living right below the 401, so where it says Coffee North of Housing Help, that road all along there. there's pockets of what Toronto has identified as priority neighborhoods all over, but that seems to be, particularly in the case of the rent bank, where the highest need is. So if you look at kind of the middle, the bottom of the yellow there where it says East York Housing Health, that little teeny chunk is our direct service catchment area. But Rent and Landlord Connect cover the entire city. It's also important to note, and we'll go back into intersectionality later, but in terms of the other kinds of services that address marginalized people, our legal aid system in Ontario has two sides. There's a certificate side primarily for criminal law, some family law, and then we have a community legal clinic system. So there are 70 legal clinics throughout the province who all do summary advice and representation in landlord and tenant legislation, income support, human rights, workers' comp, CPP, all of that. And things that we have like the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board. And having worked on both sides of the table, both in housing and on the legal clinic side, it's a huge benefit for people when they can go to a landlord-tenant tribunal and have essentially free legal advice and help negotiate something with and prevent eviction with the landlord on the spot. In Toronto, where that's been expanded even further, is the Duty Council is able to access a rent bank staff person, Faisal, on the spot to be able to negotiate payment of rental arrears. So, and that's been hugely successful and recently evaluated, and fortunately they're continuing. So we have a province-wide network of poverty law legal clinics that are publicly funded. The other major sector is the health sector. When we had a huge doctor shortage across Ontario, that turned into the development of community health centers. So the community-based health teams, which in Toronto, just about every service is multi-service at this point. But there's a strong connection with the health sector and the BAW sector, certainly the mental health sector with the Center for Addictions and Mental Health located there. It drew up a lot of people from across the province who ended up staying in Toronto, and of course the settlement community. So there's a lot of intersectionality going on, and we'll talk later about how we've tried to increase those connections. So I'll talk a little bit about who uses housing help. Of those 3 million people in Toronto, half of them are tenants, and half of those are spending in excess of 30% of their income on rent, which means that they're at risk of homelessness. So anyone is at risk, and I'm sure you've seen all the economic analogies being one paycheck away from homelessness and so on. So we're dealing with coordinating sectors and working with a large number of marginalized people. So whether it's youth, social assistance recipients, newcomers, working poor, there's a lot going on, and the housing help model has been deliberately planned to be holistic, so that we take into account not just housing in the model itself. So the functional roles. We talked about this a little bit, and then we'll kind of go through one of the handouts that you have. The functional roles in the course of the rent network and working with the city essentially consist of those things. Obviously, it's not all-inclusive, but housing assessment being the most important. Getting to know the person's story, getting to know whether they have the essential tools, ID, and source of income. What are they looking for in terms of their short and long-term plans? Counseling and coordinating cases, advocating both individually and systemically. All of the clerical stuff no one likes to do, managing documentation and statistical reporting. In Toronto's case, the city, when they started funding housing help centers, created its own database specifically for housing help center stats. So they look at length on caseload and how quickly people move out of receiving service and where they move to. Obviously, doing education on both tenant rights and responsibilities. Um, Landlord liaison and mediation is a huge chunk of work. Um, we have 9 housing help centers across the city, but we have hundreds of agencies doing housing help in their own communities, working with local landlords as you are, to keep people, get them in their homes and then keep them there. And then doing housing stabilization through follow-up. So, this is, you have a printout of this in and of itself. This is essentially the housing help model that we refer to in doing program design, in referencing back to the rent network when you're looking at, members are looking at emerging issues or things that they want to meet and talk about and learn more about. And we also use it in what we call training for essential skills in housing help, TESH, which are core knowledge areas for new workers. So we see housing help as being divided into 3 phases: housing assessment, housing access, and housing stabilization. Also known as getting started, getting in, and staying in. And so those are all the things that come under those categories. And then across the bottom are all the framework. Thank you. Ongoing stuff.
From beginning to end.
Yes. So the principles behind that work. Anti-oppression being at the top of the list, and I'll talk about that more later within PESH training. Harm reduction strategies for people that applies to, including safety planning, keeping on top of sector development issues and networking, being ethically transparent in your work, all that kind of stuff happens from start to finish. Just to highlight a couple of things, housing stabilization excuse me, can be pretty much broken up between eviction prevention and follow-up. So actively preventing eviction versus is a person's income stable, has something changed in their circumstances, doing budgeting, financial literacy, cash flow management for whatever level of income you have. Having been in social assistance myself, there's only so far you can budget $1.86. But having said that, helping people access whatever resources they can and going through a person's budget, as small as it is, can help make them feel a little more in control of what goes down. Trying to think if there's anything in there that's particularly in terms of social housing in Ontario. We have subsidized housing, which has been downloaded to all of the municipalities. So in Toronto, it's Toronto PCHC. In addition to them, there are also independent nonprofits, cooperatives, supportive housing, which is a mix of provincial housing funding and also, for instance, senior housing or health funding. So, and the whole range of the private market from rooming houses to mega contracting. Am I missing anything? That kind of covers it.
Just with the eviction prevention, I think the difference is in Ontario, when you're really hitting the wall, the key thing is send them to a legal clinic, because it's really hard to stay on top of every little point of the Residential Tenancies Act and the steps of the landlord and tenant board. So that's something we folks I found out don't have. So you, as housing workers, need to know it all. So that's really more challenging for you.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the Toronto Rent Bank, which is on the form that I require that looks like this. It's a provincial community-based financial assistance program, and we were actually just talking before we started that in Toronto, probably because of the forced amalgamations and that the cities, the boroughs weren't quite sure what to do with human services, social services at such a large level. There were several organizations, and even on an ongoing basis now, where the city has asked the community agency to take the lead. For instance, we were tagged for developing rent. There are other organizations that have concentrated and been supported to concentrate on rooming houses. And in this case, Neighborhood Information Post organization was asked to lead the way in terms of developing the rent bank. So, and there's actually 3 programs involved here. It essentially started as a rent bank in 1999, and they did an evaluation process and confirmed the business case in 2007. It's targeted specifically for people who are working, so singles or families paying market rent. In Ontario, there's a community startup fund, what's not called community startup maintenance benefit for people on social assistance, either the municipal or provincial version, to help with rent arrears, bed bugs, moving costs, that kind of thing. Unfortunately, they're coming out by 50% effective January 1st, which is going to make things very complicated. But it covers rent arrears of up to $2,500, and if necessary, the legal and sheriff fees involved. And in the last couple of years, with the economic downturn, they added first and last month's rent to that. So for people who would come in where paying rent arrears on for an unsustainable tenancy didn't make a lot of sense, the fund was also available to find a place, obviously, that they could afford. They recently, in the last couple of years, also reduced the repayment rent rate to as low as $25 a month, and that's actually helped bring more money back into the fund to the point where the rent arrears stream could possibly be supporting the person last. And that's all funneled through, was managed by the Toronto rent bank posted by Neighborhood Information Post. But each of the housing help centers has a rent bank worker. So I'll talk more about that in a minute. The other thing that we do is energy assistance. In Ontario, there were some reforms made for utility providers to create funds to support people with particularly heat and electricity cutoffs. So LEAP is one. In the case of Toronto, there's one natural gas provider, Enbridge. So they have the low-income energy assistance program, and then the City of Toronto has the Emergency Energy Fund for electricity. So Neighborhood Information Post manages that through all the housing help centers throughout Toronto. The effects of these strategies, well, first of all, in terms of how they make sure housing stabilization happens, as I was saying, there's citywide access regardless of address. So it doesn't matter if you look at that map, actually it's on the back of the rent bank flyer, it doesn't matter whether you live in one end of the city and work in the other end. You can apply for the rent bank or the utility assistance programs wherever you are. And that, as far as I'm concerned, is the way it should be, but it makes sure that people get help when they need it. Excuse me. As I said, there's dedicated staff at all 9 housing help centers. The service protocols for the rent bank in terms of how quickly the applications are processed and the check is cut are exactly timed with the Residential Tenancies Act legislation in terms of eviction. We do direct payment to the landlords, so Neighborhood Information Post cuts the check, and the tenants pick it up and take it to the landlords in most cases. And there's quarterly planning that goes on by the city, Neighborhood Information Post, and the 9 housing help centers to look at what how well we're doing and whether we could be doing things better. An example of that would be where the rent bank started off in most cases as being, well, for people who were working, um, household income mix, including social assistance, meant that more people were being excluded, and we decided to change that. So, and so last year, um, including social assistance as a proportion of household income became unacceptable eligibility criteria. The same for people who were on student loans. Um, we also started doing research coming out of the rent bank on the whole payday loan problem, and we started asking people when we started applying whether they use payday loans and how often, and we found that the incidence of payday loan wasn't huge, but the people who did use it did it all the time, and payday loans are incredibly difficult to get out of. So we're looking at doing more ongoing money management and education through the rent bank as a result. So that's just an example of where we took things beyond just basic service provision and started talking about bigger issues. The rent bank process is pretty detailed for the person on the other side of the desk. And I'll use that term other side of the desk a lot because that's what we're about. There's a lot of eligibility in terms of income, establishing an actual landlord-tenant relationship, looking at what people's disposable incomes are. So there's a lot of opportunity also then to talk about any other issues and other areas of income support that they could be getting. And it's all done online. So we have, we access an online database which then gets approved by Neighborhood Information Post, and it generates our statistics and does all that. So I can answer questions about, more detailed questions about the rent bank later. So now, we'll talk about rent, and feel free to let me know when you get to the website.
Great. Okay. So, what happened? I'll just go back to the grassroots moment where suddenly housing workers were being hired, but there was no coordination of services, and they had no training. So, a bunch of housing workers. Catherine White, they're actually still part of our network. A few people who actually told me all about this because I was there at the very beginning, said they met in coffee shops and just started to say, like, how are we going to transfer what we know to the people who are brand new to the sector, especially since there's no funding for training right now. And any organization that did train has been killed, essentially. So they came together, and at one point 90 housing workers met to talk about how to do training sessions, and they would teach each other, basically, and they would mentor each other and teach each other. But in order to create more capacity, it had to be based at an agency that could apply for funding. So once so it began as grassroots in 2000, and then I think it was 2001 that it became part of East Toronto Family Resources. East Toronto serves families, and a lot of the families that arrive, their main problem was housing, so it just became a natural that we would have a housing help center. And then as people worked at the housing help center, they realized that the problems are systemic. They're much bigger than one housing worker going out and finding a landlord to help somebody. It was a much bigger picture. So then the executive director at the time and a little committee got together to create RENT, East Toronto, the RENT network, and that was in 2001. And that gave them the funding source to build a website in 2004, which became housingworkers.ca. And once they had a website, then you can create all kinds of resources that housing workers need to do their jobs well and to learn from each other more efficiently. So essentially, Rent is a hub. It's a hub of all kinds of information coming in together where housing workers are teaching each other. But beyond just that, it's about coordinated resource development, so coordinating what people are learning so that the best practices are coming to the top, and we know that it isn't useful to hand somebody a list and say, go find your housing. That's not what a housing worker does. They have to make sure that the person actually goes to the landlord, and did they actually, how did that go? Did they actually move in? Do they still, have they got a file that has the landlord's phone number so they can call and make sure the person's okay? Like, there's, like, getting in is step one only, and the housing work really begins once the person moves in, we found. So this network began, and it's basically its aims and purpose are to end homelessness, to work ourselves out of a job. As a lot of us say in the social service sector or community sector, is we want to end homelessness or reduce homelessness or prevent homelessness, however you want to phrase it. Basically, that's what we aim to do. So we foster the collective capacity of agencies and staff to support vulnerable people. And, there may be a program out in Etobicoke that has some amazing idea we haven't thought of yet, and somebody in Scarborough has a really great landlord, and they can share those resources. We focus on training and networking within the housing health sector and across sectors. So it's not just for housing workers who are at the housing health centers. It's also people in the settlement sector, because we need them. They have the wisdom around the settlement process, and they need us to learn the steps of how to stabilize housing for someone. We link with the mental health community because they have all kinds of wisdom that we need. So all those people become members of RENT. People on RENT are not just housing workers, they're mental health caseworkers, settlement workers, ID clinic workers, all the people that it takes to stabilize housing for someone. And the way that we do it at RENT is through, its resources exist for networking and training, which is RENT stands for that. So the resources, we have an online library. Networking, we have networking sessions, and training, we do training monthly, and the touch sessions that Alice was referring to. And all this is based on the principle of social capital. Social capital refers to the collective value of all social networks and the inclinations that rise from these networks to do things for each other. That comes from the book Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam. And the idea that when we're in a network, we're more likely to help each other out. And RENT doesn't do the housing work. It creates the space for people to learn more about how to do the housing work through its various programs. It is a community of practice, really. A group of people who share a concern, and they deepen their knowledge and their expertise by interacting on an ongoing basis. And they interact in a number of ways. Basically, there are some principles behind what we're doing. Knowledge management relates to we're trying to get the best practices and the most knowledge about how to stabilize housing for someone in one place, so we do that through an online library. We have about 2,000 resources on housing research, all kinds of meeting notes from housing meetings at the city, everything imaginable in our online housing library. So we manage the knowledge that way. We promote peer learning, so we have mentorship available to people so that a more experienced housing worker can have a new housing worker come and work alongside them. I actually did that when I started out at RENT as a volunteer, just helping them with building a website in terms of getting the database going. But then I realized I needed to use this mentorship thing too. So So I used the system to go out and meet Charlie at Evangel Hall, and he sat down with me for a day and walked me through exactly how he finds those landlords, where he finds them, how he talks to them, and basically does that promotional work that you have to do with a landlord, which is really tough, and I think that's the toughest part of the job, to engage them to provide housing for people on low income, because that's, to them, they come from an entirely different framework, and that doesn't sound like a good deal to them. So we have a lot of reasons why it is beneficial for them that we work through. So that's what I learned in my mentoring. I also went to a couple of other agencies and did mentoring so I could learn more about what it is to work with teens, what it is to work with seniors. And that's a great opportunity because through this online network we can link with each other, find each other, our contact information is on there, and we can set up those opportunities. We're self-organizing in that housing workers tell us, we did have an advisory board right now. We don't have that. Other things are in place to provide us with direction, but housing workers are the ones that decide what the workshops are going to be. I get feedback monthly, and they tell me what is the hot issue, what are the things they need to know more about, and then we create workshops based on what they need. And online integration, it's like bringing it all together at housingworkers.ca so that it can travel, so that Gord can find me, right? Because he's a member of RENT. So that's how the message travels, because we do it all. Everything we do in person happens online. And then sustainability. How do we keep it all going? Basically, it's about, sorry, I'm just pulling up my notes here, but keeping it going is by making sure that people in the network feel like part of it, so that they are not just, one housing worker lost out in the universe at some shelter, but they are connected to a huge network and they have a voice and they can put a message on the discussion board, say, hey guys, I need a mover tomorrow morning. My client has no money. Does anybody have a truck? And then someone else in the network of those 1,300 people can put, yeah, call me, And so they have a voice, and that's the mentoring is very sustaining. Also, what sustains it is that it's online. That something that was said 5 years ago is on our discussion board, and we can do a search on the discussion board and find out what people did when, they needed mattresses. The person is moving into a living house, they have no mattresses. How do you find mattresses? How do you get rid of bed bugs? You can go on the discussion board and type in bed bugs and find out all the resources in the city that have been listed there for the last, since 2004 on bed bugs. So that's how it's sustained. Okay, so we have Landlord Connect, and Landlord Connect came out of housingworkers.ca basically because housing workers are saying, okay, great, we've got this network, we can find each other, we can learn the best practices, but where are the landlords? We need them, otherwise the whole thing doesn't work. So we created face-to-face interaction and online community for Landlord Connect. So Landlord Connect workshops happen face-to-face twice a year, and it's networking between landlords and housing workers. And then we have essential skills workshops where we have the 12 sessions for housing workers to learn when they're new, and that involves a landlord workshop as well, how to work with landlords. And then we have the emergent issues workshops, which are the monthly sessions that I conduct, and those are the ones where housing workers saying there's a new policy and I don't get it. Like there's a new policy at Toronto Community Housing Corporation, and generally we get 50 to 60 people come out to our workshops, and everyone was confused about this, and suddenly we had over 100 people in a very small room. It was crazy. But it was great because it was like what was happening right now. And then we have cross-sector networking workshops, which we've been doing recently, which are, for example, people from the community legal clinics come and they will present on their best knowledge about what housing workers need to know to stabilize tenancies. And then we get into groups, and we have specific problems that housing workers have faced when they were trying to stabilize housing for someone. And each group will work on that problem, and then they all present to each other. But we also do like network, because we want everyone to meet each other. The groups switch places, so all the housing workers go clockwise, and all the legal workers go counterclockwise, and they switch groups so that they're meeting a lot of different people during that day. So that's been really successful because we have so much to learn from each other. And then in terms of the online community,
Bring that up.
just sure, yeah. Next one. I think we had two different versions of the slide deck, so whoa. Okay, so in terms of the online community, actually go back to me. Sorry. Can you go back? Sorry. Yeah. Okay, so just before we go there, I'm going to explain that we have a searchable database so you can find anyone in the network across the city. We have discussion boards, we have the online library, the job shadowing, and the online toolkit. So I'm going to just show you how to find, or maybe Alice can do this because she's over there. Okay, so to find the database, you would go to networking, drop-down menu, and log in. So, and then you would go down to network members. Great. And then you could search by their name, or you could search by their workplace, like type of workplace. You could search by, so yeah, do they work in supportive housing? Maybe you saw them at a workshop, but you can't remember their name. You're trying to find them. You can search them that way. You can search by client population. Do they work with sex trade workers or whoever? You can search by their language, because maybe someone comes into my office and I don't speak the language, but maybe someone in the network does and can help me out on the phone with them. Area of the city, obviously, and then search by agency. And I find I use this the most. Like, I know they work at that agency, but I don't know, can't remember exactly who they work. So I'm searching, and in this database, we have over 500 agencies who are linked to the database. Okay, so just the other things, maybe just go down to the training drop-down menu. We've got all the events and workshops are listed there, so you can sign up for workshops there. So the past event we just had is how research can help your housing work, the Wellsman Institute, which is, we had Michael Shaptot, who's an amazing researcher and supportive homelessness initiatives, and he came to present. Before that, women in housing, needs unique supports. On the way home was another network to a network session where Rent Network, which is housing workers, connected with the drop-in network, because we have a network of people who work in drop-in centers across the city. So we did networking, cross-sector networking in that way. So if you want to go back up to the drop-down. So under training, we also have the TESH series of workshops, and that's where new housing workers can sign up, and it shows all the protocols that they have. Like, have you been doing housing for under a year? Basically, are you a student? It just asks all kinds of questions about it, and it talks about the kind of workshops that are part of TESH. So the housing overview, holistic assessment, accessing affordable housing, social assistance programs, because as we all know, it's about paying the rent, right? So you need to know where the money's coming from and how to stabilize a person's income. Tenant rights, so because that's critical to prevent evictions. Housing standards, when you go and find a place, is this place safe for my client? You know, is this a good place for them to live? You need to know a bit about how to liaise with the Housing Standards Department of the city to get units checked, make sure they're safe. Housing access and support with unique populations, best practices for working with people with mental health and substance uses And self-care, managing stress and building resiliency, really important. Really important, and that's always a good session at the end. So yeah, that runs twice a year in the spring and the fall. Okay, so back under networking, the first one is the online discussion area. And we could just go there, and we're going to go to the general discussion board and submit, and then if we cross our fingers, it will not get jammed. Yay! Okay, so these are the kind of things that people put on the discussion board. Programs for seniors, last month's rent deposit. Any question that you have, like because you're in your agency, again, you may be the only housing worker at a shelter, and you're like, I don't know, what do I do? Well, you have a resource of 1,300 people to ask, and then people pop back on the board and respond to your questions. So that has been really great, like transitional housing places to refer people to. And this is just running daily, and as I said, you can go back years to find responses to research features. Okay, back to maybe resources. Let's do resources and the resource library. So I mentioned the example of movers, so if you want to go there and just type movers, and then you go search, and you're going to find a list of affordable movers to help people when you have to go to one. So Tom the trucker. And some people who will do it for free.
Check with a truck.
Chuck with the truck. There you go. Okay. So I think that's pretty much that resource. You want to go back to PowerPoint? So there were face-to-face, this is just a review, face-to-face interaction. So the 4 kinds of workshops we have are emerging issues, cross-sector networking, the workforce development is the TESH, new worker training, and the landlord networking sessions, they're more like a lunch, they're kind of like a celebration. Twice a year we get together with landlords because this is the thing that defines us from other social service workers, right, is we need to develop a relationship with people who may have a different framework. They may come from the business community, and it's an opportunity for housing workers to make relationships with landlords and to talk about their client base and arrange for their clients to move into those units. Okay. Yeah, sure. Okay. So as I said, it grew out of housingmovers.ca in 2006. It's sector-based housing access and stabilization. The website is a hub, and our goal is to get tons of units on there, as many as possible. But there are protocols that go along with that, which I'll speak about in a minute. So we're all about partnership. And I came into the sector thinking I'm defending the rights of tenants. So this is the critical, really hard part. I have to accept that it's a partnership, and I need to, I focus on sustaining the tenancy. That is my goal. What's best for all parties in the tenancy? What's going to work best? So I'm in a mediation role, collaborating and communication between agencies, and of course the income support people too. Emphasis on mediation rather than eviction, and following service protocols. So before I go there, I just want to say a quick note about protocols. Which I have lost. So they basically, essentially, the protocols, the whole thing doesn't work unless people make agreements. So the landlord agrees to have a unit which is in the condition that would be acceptable by the standards at the City of Toronto, the Property Standards Department. They agree to rent to people on low income and not discriminate according to their income base. So a landlord can't say, I can't rent to you because you're on social assistance. And obviously that's the law, that they're not allowed to do that, but in practice, We know that happens all the time. So basically, people who join this network have to agree not to do that. They have to keep us in touch with what's going on. Oh yeah, right, there you go. There's the agreement. Great, okay. Agree to post, oh God, let me see. Post affordable to those who, yeah, on mixed income. So they have to agree to maintain the property. They have to agree to contact the housing worker as soon as there's a problem. Instead of just going to eviction, they're willing to call the housing worker and do mediation. They agree to let us know when the unit's built, and they agree to keep in touch with us, to share problems and success stories with us so that we know how it's going. You know, it doesn't help if the landlord calls me and says they trashed the unit, you know, like way down the road. They need to tell me before anything goes, like when things start to fall apart, we need to know early so we can call the housing worker who did the referral to help with the follow-up. So I wonder if we should do that. The housing worker to do that. Okay, don't worry about it. I know them. A housing worker needs to do follow-up. That's the bottom line. When they send somebody to a unit on this list, they need to keep in touch, keep a file, know who the landlord is, be available for phone calls. The amount of follow-up any housing worker can do can vary. When I worked in the drop-in center, there was a lineup of 17 people out my door all the time. How much follow-up can I do? But I need to be available to mediate. You know, I need to be able to make appointments to go with somebody to the landlord and tenant board if they need that. I need to see myself not just as somebody who puts people in a unit, but as someone who stabilizes a tenancy. So that is essentially it, and it's similar to the landlord protocols. Keep in touch with us. Let us know when a unit gets built, so that the communication circle becomes this. Those are the protocols. Can you go back to the PowerPoint, please? So we have a listings and a search options, so you can find the units on the website. Should we go through that? No, I'm going to keep going. Okay. We have a community map, so when people are searching for a unit, there's a map that pops up and it shows all the low-cost grocery stores, food banks, so we can know if the neighborhood is going to suit the person, so they can see a map. We have specialty listings, so we only list market rent units on this website, but we have a list of all the places, and we've uploaded some applications. So if YWCA has a program for housing, they can get the application online. They can see, like there's a section, seniors housing, where can they go to fill out all the applications for seniors housing? And of course, you know, the wait list in Toronto is like 8 years for social housing. So people sometimes say, well, you know, why market rent? Why are we focusing on that? Well, it's because because there's an 8-year wait list. And where are they going to go for that 8 years? I mean, let's face it, we're dealing with private market landlords, and we will be for a long time. So that's why we focus on that. We have an emergency board. If someone looks through the list and they can't find anything that suits the tenant, what they will do is put a message on the emergency board, and it goes out to all the landlords in the network. So how many landlords do we have right now? 3? Yeah, so they will all get an email saying, I have a client, they can afford $500 a month, and they need a bachelor apartment, which is impossible in Toronto. Okay, a room. I'll say a room in a rooming house. And yeah, extremely unaffordable city. This is the area they want to be in, or something. And so the landlords who can meet that need, because maybe they haven't put a listing up, but maybe they do have a unit they didn't put up, so then they'll respond directly back to the housing market. So that was actually the head of the Greater Toronto Apartment Association that came up with that idea. So that's partnership, right? A landlord came up with that idea. And it's worked really effectively. It's been really great. So the point is tenancy stabilization, as I said. And we're also about landlord education. We realize it doesn't always help to just read the Riot Act to a landlord if they're breaking the Human Rights Code and saying, I'm not going to rent to this person because they're on low income or because I don't like the way they look. We try and take an education approach. Well, really, tell me more about that, and can I give you a little bit of information? Like, we educate. Because we need those landlords. We need to keep them in our database. And something I should say about our database is there was a big conversation at the beginning of Landlord Connect about who are we going to allow on the website. Only the legal landlords, because there's tons of illegal rooming houses out there, but they're very affordable. And we decided as a group they're all going on the website. Everything goes on, because what I think is terrible, a client might love. Who am I to judge? That being said, we do check with property standards to make sure that they're not in violation of property standards. Every new landlord, we make sure of that. And if we have a complaints process. If we hear that there are problems with units, then there's like 3 tries and right kind of thing, right? So the whole rationale for it is eviction prevention, and this is a model which I find really useful. How to make a stable home. It involves, you need the housing, which is the landlord, you need the person, which is the client, and you need the support, which is us. And the thing that keeps it all going together is the communication, the partnership, and the accountability. And the accountability is the protocols that we ask people to follow. The partnership happens in our landlord networking sessions, and communication is hopefully just ongoing in all the different ways that we work with people. Okay? So sometimes it comes to mediation. Basically, it's like, just instead of go straight to the tribunal, instead of because how many times as a housing worker have you heard the landlord call you and say, just get them out. Just get them out. I just don't want them, right? And so it's like, slow down the process. Let's have a conversation. Can we do a payment plan? Can we talk through what the problem is? Do we need to get a community mediation service? We have St. Stephen's Community Mediation Service in Toronto, so maybe we can link them up with them to do mediation. Anything that's going to slow that down to keep people in their home. Okay? Oh, and I should also say that Landlord Connect helps with that. I used to be the Landlord Connect worker, but my coworker is now, and I hear her next to me all day long. So somebody calls with a complaint, so she'll help hook the landlord up with Landlord Health Center, and she'll help the housing worker hook up with mediation services, and she doesn't do the mediation, but she encourages the mediation to happen. So Landlord Connect was organic. It kind of came out of a community of practice of rent. And that's what we were talking about at dinner last night, that it's not just start phoning landlords and you got a list. It's got to happen in a context. You have to have a community. You have to have, trust between people that, that if I send somebody to this unit, there's going to be support there. So it comes out of, it really helps to have those community legal clinics and just the mediation services and everything that builds around it. Landlords and housing workers agreeing to responsibilities, collaboration and sharing of resources. As I said, education, networking sessions between the housing workers and the landlords. I'll just say that we try to make that a lunch, and we just make it fun. Like, we got balloons and
Food is good.
Yeah, balloons are good, and food to make people connect. That's what it's all about. So I just
talk about the challenges a little bit.
Well, I think I'll just say one word about housing workers, the expectation on them. is to end homelessness. And although that is our goal, it's a lot to ask of somebody. You've got to know so much to do that. So we know it's a really, really hard job. And the best way to do it is collectively. So the idea is that housing workers across the city contribute to the network. They send us their landlords. And so we're sharing our resources. And it's a tough job to do alone. I think that's basically what we're saying. Yeah, basically, if we fail at that, people are going to be back on the street. Like, we've all had the experience of working with someone really hard to get them into housing, and then a month later, oh my God, they're dehoused again. So that's why we need to work collectively as a network. And that collectiveness happens in our relationships with landlords. If I have a really, fallout with the landlord, that's going to impact how the next housing worker gets related to by that landlord. So it's about working as a sector together, I think.
I want to touch on some sector
You want to do that?
level
Okay, go ahead.
stuff. And before I do, I wanted to point out two things in your package that we actually just got from the last rent session that to point out to you. One is from the Wellesley Institute, which is Toronto-based, but it does research and policy stuff on a national level. And they have, you can download this yourself, the homelessness iceberg, which really explains well for the purposes of public education and advocacy where homeless people are. They also have a mapping feature, which is the yellow sheet, on their website that shows innovative housing programs and services across the country, including your network. So although it's located in Toronto, there's a lot of really useful stuff there. The other thing that, I won't go to the website, but one of the sector tools that we created with the city and participating organizations is the Housing Help Resource Toolkit, which is a public listing of housing access and stabilization organizations by client population that's accessible to the public. So if you go to housingworkers.ca or landlordconnect.ca, anyone can access that information, and that's something that as a sector we decided we wanted to do because we're not gatekeepers to those services. In terms of other ways that the sector builds capacity, we build public education materials in terms of in your package there's a rental housing checklist. We do a resource on which consolidates all the income assistance program benefits into one sheet so that housing workers can have that handy. And there's system planning tables that are they're led by the city, but they're very results-oriented in terms of participating agencies and finding local solutions. So there's a housing help services network that the city hosts that Janet actually co-chairs, where there are interesting topics every month, and about 60, 70 people go to that every month, in addition to anywhere between 30 and 80 people that come to rent sessions. There's a working group specifically for rooming houses, and looking at, in our case, parts of the city, rooming houses are legal and some aren't, and how to support keeping those actually open because the rooming house stock is dwindling. A rental housing advisory committee where there are more private sector landlords involved, one specifically on immigrant and refugee issues, and as I was mentioning before, the rent bank steering committee. And the housing help the managers network. We get together quarterly as well. So in terms of challenges overall, I'll just go through this really quickly. Having an online environment, when we started 12 years ago or 11 years ago, it was a little more, the technology wasn't there, and getting people up to speed on moving things online. Emphasizing service coordination as a function of housing stabilization, so working with other people. Property standards, and of course the lack of affordable housing generally. So this is just a highlight reel of what we've talked about. I think the most important things are collaboration, um, building on those commonalities cross-sectorally, and having sector capacity support. So having Janet organize these events, see what's happening online, having a staff person actively recruit and landlords and working with them. We have a dedicated person who just does resources and puts out three different e-bulletins a month. And then we also have one person that just does the essential skills training.
Just before we do, there's one
Sure.
thing that I would like to say about Landlord Connect, which was really interesting, and it is that when we first put the units on the website, Housing Workers said they're too expensive. So we went out and got all the rooming house landlords to post their units, and a lot of problems happened because we realized that the legislation around rooming houses is a mess in the city. That the old city of Toronto allows rooming houses, but everything outside of there is not legal rooming houses. And so they operate anyway, and nobody really looks at it. And then there's 4 different pieces of legislation that relate to rooming houses. And so what it gave us the opportunity to do was some research on rooming house legislation and to impact change in a number of ways. We did a report. We listed rooming house questions and answers for housing workers. We created a public information document that answered all kinds of questions like, can a housing worker make a property standards complaint on behalf of their client? My client is threatened with eviction. What should I do? Are they allowed to have rooming house rooms in the basement with no windows? All those kind of questions we just piled onto an information document. We also created something called Good Practices for Housing Workers who support tenants and work with landlords in the rooming house sector. So the housing worker side, how to best work with rooming house landlords. Again, a very different group than we are. And then good practices in the rooming house sector for rooming house landlords and to help them to understand what we're doing and how we can really learn from each other. Like rooming house landlords actually want to know a lot about what we know, and vice versa. Like we can learn a lot from each other. And again, that's the partnership approach.
So I'd like to wrap up just to touch on 2 of these 4 points, because I think we've talked a lot about the first 2, and where we're looking at going back to the stakeholders and who are the entire housing hop sector, and saying, okay, rent's been around for 12 years, and where do you see rent playing a role now? And it's, as it turns out, I mentioned at the very beginning that we're back to another housing crisis where there's been a wholesale shift in housing funding from one ministry to another, losing $22 million in the process and cutting that financial assistance program for people on social assistance in half. And that's all going to start taking effect January 1st. So where we're going to start is consulting, going back to housing workers who are members and people who aren't, and asking how rent works for them, and also embarking on a planning process. So we're taking what's currently going on and being able to identify and prioritize issues and coming up with local solutions. And because rent has been around for 12 years, we're now in a better place to be able to come up with our own sector-based solutions and work again with the city and remind them that that because it's a slightly different climate now than it was 12 years ago, on a municipal level, what ideas we have in terms of effective use of homelessness reduction dollars. So we've in 12 years almost come full circle, and we're using 12 years of experience in membership networking and a lot of innovative programming in the meantime to more effectively deal with the crisis this time around. So that's us in a really big nutshell. There's contact information. There's already resources in there, but I'd be more than glad to send you electronically any of the other resources, some of which you can just go online and get. but anything that isn't, we would certainly be glad to share. So thank you for taking quite some time to listen to us, and we'll be glad to answer your questions.
Okay, we're gonna have a couple mics available here. There's one mic over here by Marianne, and we've got this wireless that I can pass around. So, does anybody have any questions? Daryl's hand first.
Good morning. Great
Hi.
program you got going. So I have a three-part question for you, including your housing workers or staff, as you explained in your presentation. How many actual employees do you have in the entire organization? Would be the first part.
Mm-hmm.
The second part would be, notwithstanding the architecture in your website, which looks really cool. Collecting that data would be very time consuming. How long would that take? And the third part of the question would be, in your experiences, do you find the dynamics change from the inner city or the core areas of the city to the non-core areas? And I'll just listen.
Well, to start with, going back to that very first slide, there's 4 programs in the organization. We have 90 staff overall, 9 in housing. So, to give you some idea there, the data in the databases,
But I think it's important to say for housing, if you're asking for the network, there are 4
in the
of us.
network.
There are 4 of us. I do the rent facilitation. There's someone who takes care of the new housing worker program. There's the landlord connect facilitator. And then there's Tioni, who kind of is in the background working on all the websites. So it's 4 of us. And then Alice.
So that answers your question? Okay. So yeah, those 4 people then support, well, the 1,300 members and beyond in the rent network itself. The second question was about data management. So we've been working with the same programmer working in Cold Fusion for housingworkers.ca and then Landlord Connect, I guess it'll be 5 years later. And so everything is predicated on the database of housing workers and then the landlord database and the listings. So they're linked in the back end. It's the same back end. And there's been quite a lot of effort and money put into creating a back end where the statistical management is essentially self-generating. There's a little bit of analysis that goes on, and we've been tweaking it constantly so that we get more accurate information. For example, all of the events are evaluated heavily, and that's done with an online survey tool that's actually in the website and database infrastructure itself. So we can very quickly get information in terms of when people actually fill in the surveys online, how many people showed up, and very detailed questions about outcome measures in the training that we do and the events that we hold. So yeah, there's a lot of work that went into creating a backend to be able to give us that kind of information.
And just in terms of data of how many units built by Landlord Connect, we have systems in place to try and get that number, but we'll never really know, right? Like we have a system that shows, like when a housing worker refers someone to a unit, we know that the person's been referred there, and then the landlord can click on the website and say it was filled, so we know that one was definitely filled. But how do we know that tons of people aren't sending people out there and that they're getting filled, but the landlord never told us? So it's probably a lot larger number than filled than we know.
Yeah. Well, interestingly enough, I mean, there are still, um, um, I would say, a large low-income population in the downtown core, but we also have sort of scattered neighborhoods all over the place. But generally speaking, the demographic in terms of income has totally flipped, so that the downtown core is becoming increasingly more gentrified and pushing people up um, outside of downtown, well, considerably to the edges of the city. So there was a study done, and it's pretty frightening, really, to see that flip. In fact, most of the people that are accessing the rent bank are from the far reaches of the city. And so there's the people who are working for and at risk of eviction. So there's been some pretty interesting stuff happening economically and demographically in Toronto. No problem.
Hi. Maybe I was misinformed, but I live in Winnipeg. I don't live in Toronto. So I understand that you guys are coming here to show us your model.
Right.
But how does that directly affect us Winnipeg people? I mean, I understand the Winnipeg, your network that's going on here, but this is a whole morning talking about Toronto, and we're here in Winnipeg. So maybe I was misinformed as a student. I don't think this really relates to me at all. I'm sure to the organizations that are working with people, but I don't know. I'm in Winnipeg, so I'm just a little lost, I guess.
Well, I'm sensitive to the fact that everybody gets sick of hearing about Toronto.
Yeah.
We don't think we're the center of the universe. We really don't. It's just been our own experience, and we're just trying to share a model that might be helpful for you, and if it's not helpful, just don't use it. Just use what works for you.
I mean, basically, we're trying to establish a network here in the city, and we're looking. Well, that will be. We're doing more in the afternoon, but really, what we're going to be asking people to do in a breakout session is to sit down and discuss, some of the ideas that are being presented here and how we could incorporate them into a kind of network structure that we're trying to establish here in the city.
Yep. Well, you need to join as a member. It's a private membership because people put their personal information, like their contact information there, so you need to join. But you don't have to be from Toronto to join. You have to be working for an agency, basically.
And part of how any community does a better job for its own community is sharing best practices in other communities. So, there's a lot of information, but that's basically what we're trying to get at.
Okay, I was wondering, I was noticing under a provincial-based financial assistance program, it helps pay like arrears of a rent of $2,500 or whatever amount it is.
Mm-hmm.
Who's paying for that, and why can't they just put that on to like the assistance? Like, say if somebody is on assistance and they need that help, why do they have to, keep searching other places to go? Why can't they just have it available to them, if they're like bad renters or they've had bad dealings with landlords? Like, why can't they just, kind of help, like somebody in the assistance
That's the kicker.
help them?
If people had a living wage, if they had enough on social assistance, if the child benefit was higher, all of those things would make all of that unnecessary, and people would be able to have a healthier, better quality of life and be able to afford their housing.
Right, but I
Absolutely.
mean, this money that you're getting from, like, the people that are getting the help from, that is still coming from the government, is it not?
It's taxpayers'
So then I don't
dollars.
understand why they wouldn't just, include some of that in their budget, rather than having to go to another, to another program.
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
for over the last decade, well, actually more closer to 15 years, there's been more and more policy, which is conservatively based, that takes money. What really happens at a practical level is it takes money out of people's wallets, and so it looks better politically to provide an emergency service than to raise welfare rates and tick off a lot of voters.
But don't they have emergency assistance for people who are on assistance? Like,
Yes.
don't they have that emergency assistance available to them regardless?
Well,
I think what
they
you're
do.
saying basically is like, can't you just go to the newspaper and find a place and what's the big deal?
No,
No?
I'm not
You're not
talking
saying
about,
that?
I'm talking about, like, just why you have to go to another program, you know, rather than, if you're on assistance, why can't the assistance people try to help you with getting, you know, a rent arrears or help
it's
with
a
a damage
huge
deposit? Like, because you just have to go
It's
to.
a whole job, like it's like you could work night and day to do it, and social assistance people have their hands full, and like, it's just another job, you know, it's a different thing. Yeah.
It's partially political, it's partially financial, it's much cheaper to have an emergency program that makes people jump through 50 million hoops to get money.
Hi there.
Hi.
I just was wondering, I like the Landlord Connect website. I think it's great. How did you get landlords to actually post things? Because I find myself, I think my colleagues agree, it's really tough to coordinate with a landlord and trying to prevent that eviction or just even just create that positive rapport with them. So how did you guys get landlords to actually start posting things, having that positive rapport? It sounds like it works and you've had some success. So how did you get it all started on the landlord perspective, if that makes any sense?
So it starts off by introducing that it's a partnership. We did presentations to the Greater Toronto Apartment Association, to the Rooming House Working Group, to the Landlord Self-Help Center, so we found landlords that way. We found them through housing workers making referrals, so if the housing worker is referring them for the list, then it's probably a landlord who's already worked with our clients, so they're good people to have on the website. Everything in any way we can possibly get landlords, and then the way we build a relationship is partly through the cross-sector landlord housing worker networking events twice a year, and by just constantly encouraging the mediation. It's a gradual process, you know, from through education. Does that answer what you're asking? Oh yeah, it is the hardest part of the job, I found.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to do the best for your clients, and so, you know, everyone's going to have their own list. But by the same token, by working together on a case-by-case basis, you can build capacity there. The other thing is for, as far as landlords concerned, taking the argument of, well, I don't want a tenant on welfare. I don't want a tenant with X issue. It is being able to counter that and say, by housing workers being involved in that particular tenancy, you're going to avoid the problems you would otherwise have, because you're supporting that tenancy and you're supporting that relationship between the landlord and the tenant. And that conversation has to happen a lot. And you know, that's why Landlord Connect is a full-time staff program, because we're trying to get the word out to housing workers and landlords. No problem.
Hi, thanks for coming. I think you guys have an awesome network system in Toronto, and it's something we need here for sure, because I work in at a resource center where we help women find housing and stabilize their housing and other housing issues. I just have a question. Do you guys post like on your website where, like, for example, the housing research stuff, like at home, and what their successes are? Like, do you guys post success stories on the networking site?
Yeah, and both on the discussion board and in the online library, there's an opportunity for people to post personal anecdotal stuff, which is actually very useful to the whole network and hearing what works for people. But the online library itself, we post documents from any number of sources, and then we let people know when things are updated. So on the homepage, anything that's been in the news or anything that's been newly uploaded If you go to the homepage, you'll see what the most recent stuff is, including initiatives like that.
And my other question is for the like the community resources for like people finding housing for people. Like that is. Do you guys train, or is there like mentors out there in Toronto that help other people find housing?
I'm having trouble hearing. Is there a microphone down
Yep.
there somewhere?
Yeah,
Did you,
it's fine.
are you okay?
It's fine.
Okay,
Yep.
let me go ahead.
So are you talking about the tenants or the housing workers in terms of resources?
The housing workers,
Yeah.
like the resource center, do you guys train?
We actually piloted a mentor program early on so that new housing workers could job shadow or either through email or phone or in person communicate with people that could provide a mentoring role. And we're creating a sort of a self-serve function on the website right now so that when you become a member of housingworkers.ca, there's this huge thing that we ask you to fill out, because the more information we have about housing workers, the better they can connect to each other. And one of those things is, would you be interested in receiving or giving job shadowing or mentoring opportunities? So that page is going to come up with, so if you're interested in someone that's, if you're interested in having a mentor or job shadowing someone in a different sector, for instance, you can go to that page, get that person's information, and contact them directly and set up, a face-to-face.
I know that on your website you do post affordable housing. And so do you have any criteria to ensure that when affordable housing is posted that it is of quality nature? Because we don't want run-down or even slum landlords to post, because it's even a significant issue in the city too.
Well, the criteria, we ask that the landlords maintain their properties according to municipal licensing and standards, and we check against, the city has in that department a list of outstanding work orders for buildings, and we take a look at what those particular work orders are. There could be work orders for graffiti on the outside of the building. We're not going to take that as seriously as electrical fire safety issue, but the reality is, as much as we would like to prevent substandard housing, it exists. So if we know about it and it's serious, then we'll remove the listing. And we check against the property standards inspections. But if it would be impossible for us to personally verify, which would be the only way we could do it, the standard of every single unit that's listed.
And it's not our job, it's the city's job to inspect those units, so we can teach people about how to get the inspector to come and make sure the tenant is there when the inspector arrives, so the whole thing happens. But we don't know what a safe unit looks like. We have to be quite knowledgeable to know what makes it safe or not, so that's got to be in the hands of the municipality.
Two questions. First one, just quickly, I'm not sure I heard where you get your operating funds. That's the first question. I think from the government, but which level of government? That kind of thing. The second question is just around, you talked a lot about intersectoral ways of operating and collaboration and that kind of thing. And I'm just wondering, and it sounds like you have also a relationship with the child welfare system, if I understood correctly. I think here we've had a bit of difficulty developing good collaboration with that part of the government system, not just with regard to housing, but with regard to like community development initiatives of all kinds. So I'm just wondering if you could comment on that.
Well, on the funding side, provincially, there were, back in 99, 2000, there was the federal Skippy funding to address homelessness initiatives in larger centers. So Toronto being a larger center, the money was provided. Essentially, the city flows through either federal or provincial dollars. There isn't, in terms of housing, a lot of direct, except for specialized housing, a lot of direct funding to community agencies from the province. So half of, we have 9 different staff and 6 different programs in 2 different funding streams. So there's provincial funding and federal funding that supports both the direct service and the sector capacity. In terms of child welfare, that's a huge issue. In Toronto, the child welfare agencies are a lot more supportive of families than in rural communities. In my experience, I've been in rural communities where there hasn't been an attempt to support a family that, for instance, had their heat cut off and the children get pulled. And it's very hard as a housing worker and providing housing and income security services to help a family that's in that situation. But part of our cross-sectoral activities have included working with the child welfare agencies directly, and so creating those linkages.
And we did a workshop this year that was cross-sector networking where we did the same as we did with the legal clinics, where the child welfare folks get up and present, then the housing workers get up and present, and then we go in groups and we network and we learn from each other with case scenarios.
Okay, I think I'm afraid we're just running behind. I'm going to allow 2 more questions, hopefully a couple of quick ones.
Good morning. Thank you for coming. I am a rental safety coordinator in a local agency, and I was just looking at your housing help model in the getting in part. I notice it says make the unit a home. How is that done? How do you guys achieve that goal?
Sorry, can you repeat the?
I was just wondering how you guys achieve that goal of making the unit a home for the potential tenant.
Oh, making it a home.
I think that depends on the worker, the agency, how much time they have. And part of it is community mapping, helping them learn what are the networks around them. Like if you have the follow-up time to go and help a person find out where's the best places for food, where's the best recreation center around here, linking to their family members for support. All that can happen, but not every housing worker can do that. But I think it's a goal, right? It's an aim, and it's important to have those. It's the ideas that keep us going, right? And that home is what people really want and need.
There are some resources like furniture banks outside of thrift shops and that sort of thing where people can access stuff. And a lot of agencies individually develop relationships with donors. So there's physically making it a home, having the home located in a place that actually is meaningful to someone, where they can be close to family or church or social recreational activities that they have interest in. Is that the kind of thing you're thinking about? Yeah.
And helping them mediate with the landlord when problems come up, because it doesn't feel like home if you're feeling like you're at war with your landlord, right?
Good morning.
Hi.
At our agency, we deal specifically with a criminalized population, so that adds an extra roadblock. I was just wondering if you had any experience with that.
Can you narrow down criminalized, because that applies to an awful lot of people.
Criminal records
Oh, okay.
and previous,
so
like real recent.
Yeah.
So we have the John Howard
Yeah.
Society of Toronto, and they are the expertise on that, and they come and do workshops for other housing workers about how to handle that, and they have specific ways of speaking with landlords, and I don't think I can really say what their presentation is right now. I mean, I just don't think that I should.
Yeah, there's, I would say the 2 organizations for recently incarcerated, post-incarceration services for men and women are kind of have the market cornered. We do have, I guess, there is a program, the Streets to Homes program, which is federally funded, which comes in 2 phases. One would be helping street-involved people and people coming out of post-incarceration and finding them a home, and then a second set of services then provides 2 years of follow-up. So that's the particular model in Toronto. And um, yeah, and I guess the short version is, John Howard and help me with the other one. Elizabeth Fry are the two agencies that work specifically with people who are criminalized.
So we can give you contacts and we can talk later about that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.